The story of forgiveness, or the profound lack of it, inside the British royal family didn't begin with Oprah's now famous interview. It began years earlier, in the quiet, gilded corridors of Buckingham Palace, in hushed conversations where the entire future of the monarchy was being reshaped by a single, powerful relationship. When a devoted Prince Harry first introduced Meghan Markle to his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, the long-reigning monarch saw something she hadn't encountered in decades. It wasn't just charm or ambition, it was a fierce, unyielding determination wrapped in a layer of flawless Hollywood polish, and that combination deeply unsettled her. Tradition had always been the Queen's anchor, the very bedrock of her reign, yet here was a woman who seemed not just willing, but ready to bend it to her will. In a gesture of goodwill, the Queen immediately broke long-standing rules. Meghan was invited to Sandringham for Christmas before the wedding, a sacred privilege that had never been extended to any other unmarried partner in royal history. In an even more unprecedented move, Doria Ragland and Thomas Markle were mentioned as possible guests, a stunning gesture of inclusion meant to bridge the gap. But instead of seeing gratitude for these compromises, the palace saw Meghan tightening her grip. She refused her own father's presence at the wedding, systematically distanced her entire family, and insisted on walking into royal life as a figure completely untethered from her past. To the Queen, this behavior was more than just unusual, it was deeply calculated. The message was crystal clear. Meghan wanted no history attached to her, no past that could be scrutinized, only the carefully crafted image of a misunderstood outsider, stepping alone and vulnerable into the powerful world of the crown. That very image of the solitary figure became the absolute foundation of the royal wedding. Behind the smiling photos and the extravagant, televised pageantry of the royal wedding, insiders whispered that the event had stopped being about Harry and Meghan long before they even exchanged their vows. It had become a spectacle entirely about optics. The guest list was famously filled with Hollywood faces, celebrities like Oprah and George Clooney, who had little to no real connection with the couple, while actual family members were deliberately and cruelly excluded. Meghan's own father, who was recovering from serious health issues, was dismissed entirely. Her half-siblings were completely ignored. Even her mother, Doria, though she was allowed to attend, was told to stay at the margins. The cameras famously captured Doria Ragland sitting completely alone in her green coat, an isolated figure positioned directly across from the entire United Windsor line. It was a shot that played exactly into Meghan's carefully constructed narrative, the narrative of standing apart, unwanted and unprotected by the cold, unfeeling institution she was marrying into. Prince Charles, ever conscious of appearances and desperate to avoid a public relations disaster, tried to compensate. He personally funded Doria's designer wardrobe. He invited an American pastor to preside over the ceremony, and he arranged for a gospel choir to perform, all to highlight and celebrate Meghan's heritage. On the surface, it looked like a beautiful, modern celebration. But beneath it all, it was pure damage control. The royal family was bending over backwards, not out of genuine joy, but out of fear. They were terrified that any perceived misstep would ignite the very accusations of racism that the monarchy was so desperate to avoid. The Queen had hoped that her initial kindness would neutralize any suspicion. Instead, it backfired spectacularly, as every single concession she made only seemed to embolden Meghan further. The money alone told its own story. A staggering £30 million were poured into the wedding, with security costs reaching levels that were unheard of. Even Princess Diana's wedding hadn't required that scale of protection. By comparison, Princess Eugenie's ceremony later that same year looked modest, almost frugal. Within the palace walls, resentment began to grow. Why was so much being spent on a union that felt more like a Hollywood spectacle than a genuine marriage? And why were centuries of royal protocol being discarded for a newcomer who seemed intent on rewriting the royal script entirely in her own name? Perhaps the most chilling realization for the royal family came from the timing of it all. Each and every step of Harry and Meghan's public story seemed to be strategically designed to overshadow another royal moment. When Princess Eugenie joyfully announced her engagement, Meghan's team immediately let it be known that she was pregnant, a claim that instantly stole all the headlines. Whenever other royals, like Kate Middleton, stepped into the spotlight for a major event, Meghan and Harry would suddenly unveil new photos, schedule last-minute appearances, or leak dramatic stories to their favored journalists. This wasn't just a series of unfortunate coincidences, it was a clear and deliberate strategy. The monarchy, an institution built on centuries of tradition and a rigid hierarchy, suddenly found itself at the mercy of a woman who understood the power of modern media far better than any crown jewel. By the morning of the wedding, the Queen's public smile was thin, her eyes heavy with a burden no one could see. She knew she was presiding over more than just vows. She was watching the beginning of a seismic shift, one that could permanently alter the monarchy itself. Prince Charles appeared visibly uneasy. Prince William was cold and distant. And Harry, completely blinded by his devotion, refused to listen to any warnings from his family. For the Queen, it wasn't just a feeling of disapproval, it was a profound sense of surrender. She wasn't granting her permission for this union, she was being cornered into compliance. And Prince Charles, standing in the shadows of that very moment, would never, ever forget it. To him, the day his mother was forced to bow to outside pressure wasn't a celebration, it was a profound humiliation, one that he would carry with him long after he finally wore the crown himself. As the applause from the wedding faded, the deep cracks beneath the polished surface began to widen into chasms. Inside Buckingham Palace, whispers turned into late-night crisis meetings. Senior courtiers compared notes, realizing that every decision, from the guest list to the ceremony details, had been pushed, rushed, or outright manipulated. Prince Charles was particularly unsettled. He had extended immense generosity to Meghan, offering financial help for her mother, even offering to fly her father to London on a private jet after his heart scare. Each and every one of these compassionate gestures had been rejected, not quietly, but with a cold defiance that made it perfectly clear she didn't want integration into the family, she wanted separation. And Harry, fiercely protective and loyal to a fault, was the shield that made it all possible. The early months of their married life should have been a blissful honeymoon period. Instead, they felt like a relentless political campaign. Damaging stories began to leak to the press, not from tabloids digging for dirt, but from palace staff who felt cornered and silenced. Assistants described cold silences, sudden, angry outbursts, and constant demands for deference that went far beyond normal royal protocol. Meghan wasn't just adapting to royal life, she was restructuring it to her own advantage. By the time she sat across from Oprah, the groundwork for her narrative had already been laid. The tale of the innocent outsider mistreated by the cruel, uncaring crown had been scripted and rehearsed long before the cameras ever started rolling. The Queen, a veteran of weathering countless crises, chose to remain silent. But that silence weighed heavily on the family. Insiders described her as watchful, her deep disappointment clear to everyone, but never voiced aloud. She had given her blessing to this marriage in order to preserve the monarchy's image, and now that very same monarchy was being portrayed to the world as cruel, cold, and racist, the very accusations she had tried so hard to diffuse with kindness. For Charles, it was agony. He had not only supported the wedding, but had personally stepped in to walk Meghan down the aisle when her own father was absent. That gesture, which was meant as a sign of compassion, was now being seen as his complicity in what he increasingly regarded as a carefully laid trap. And through it all, his patience eroded. His mother had been cornered into saying yes. He had been pushed into playing the role of peacemaker. And Harry, once his pride and joy, now seemed completely unreachable, his devotion to his wife far stronger than his bond to the family that had raised him. The reign of King Charles carries with it more than just a crown. It carries a wound that has never healed. In public, he maintains the stoic and restrained posture of a monarch. But behind the palace walls, his resentment lingers like an old scar. He vividly remembers watching his mother, a woman who had ruled with iron patience for 70 years, being backed into a corner where tradition was forced to bow to accusation. That moment defined his future reign as much as any coronation oath. Any forgiveness that was once possible has now hardened into something immovable and permanent. To Charles, Meghan Markle wasn't just a difficult daughter-in-law. She became the living symbol of a humiliation that the monarchy could never fully erase. The Queen's passing may have shifted the global spotlight, but it did not heal the fracture. At her funeral, the photographs of Harry standing alone and apart from his brother told the story more clearly than any tabloid ever could. It wasn't just grief that separated them, it was years of deep mistrust born from that one single choice, and approval that was given under duress. Charles ascended the throne with the full weight of history on his shoulders, yet his triumph felt muted. He had inherited not just the crown, but a painful, permanent reminder that even the monarchy could be manipulated when fear is allowed to overshadow resolve. In hushed conversations within the palace, senior aides sometimes still refer to it as the shotgun wedding, not because of a scandalous romance, but because it was forced through by circumstances no one dared to oppose. To many, it remains the last great miscalculation of Queen Elizabeth's long and storied reign. But to Charles, it is something far more personal. It is the reason why, for him, forgiveness is and always will be impossible.